Welcome to Straight Talk with My OBMD podcast. Join me for a bi-weekly discussion on topics most relevant to women's health today. We are your source for medically accurate, real-world advice and all things related to your health and well-being as a woman. From menses to menopause, we've got you covered. I'm your host, Dr. Dayna Smith, a fully practicing, board-certified OBGYN physician with close to 20 years experience. I am also the founder of the website that is 100% dedicated to women's health, myobmd.org. At myobmd.org, we write on all aspects related to women's health. Listen to our podcast, visit our website, subscribe to our newsletter, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, myobmd.org. All right, so welcome to another episode of the Straight Talk with My OBMD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dayna Smith, and today you're going to notice something a little different. Today we are on video, and we also have a guest, and I'm so excited to have a chat with Dr. Chappell. And Dr. Chappell is a registered dietitian, very knowledgeable, very skilled. She has a PhD in nutrition, metabolism, and is it reproductive?
Reproductive endocrinology, yes.
Reproductive endocrinology. So today we are going to speak with Dr. Chappell, who is also an author. She has authored Low-Insulin Lifestyle book, and also the founder of Lily Health. And so we have been so excited to have Dr. Chappell on here today because, you know, one of the things that we're passionate about in My OBMD is not just women's health in general, but the specifics. We get down to the nitty-gritty of your health. And so we're also going to talk about PCOS and how PCOS has a relationship to your something called insulin resistance. And now you've heard of the diabetes, of course, we've all heard that term before, but insulin resistance is something that is an adjacent, if you would say, to diabetes, but it's also very different and also something that you have to be knowledgeable about. So without further ado, let me bring in Dr. Chappell.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here to talk about my two favorite topics, insulin resistance and PCOS. So
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today. And let's start with just telling us a little bit about you and your journey and how you came to have this passion with insulin resistance.
Oh, absolutely. So I started having PCOS symptoms at 14. I actually didn't even start my period till I was 16, which is pretty late. One period every maybe 8 months to a year after that for probably 6 years. Had cysts on my ovaries, had severe acne. I was on Accutane twice, and struggled with my weight. And when I was 21, I was studying to be a dietitian. I was in my 4th year, about to graduate with my degree in nutrition. And I finally got diagnosed with PCOS, and I had never heard, not in 4 years of undergrad, did I ever hear about PCOS or insulin resistance for that matter. And all I was told was, you're going to need to lose weight, which nobody who's studying to be a dietitian wants to be told that, but I definitely needed to lose weight. I was probably 50 pounds heavier. But I was doing all the things. I mean, I was doing everything that I was learning in school. All the whole grains and all the low-fat dairy and no, I was just doing everything, and I was working out all the time, and my weight was just getting worse. My acne was worse. My periods were so irregular. So that really launched me in this journey. I thought, I have to learn more about what this is and to figure it out for myself, because whatever I'm doing isn't working. And that really led me to learn about insulin resistance and how certain foods affect insulin levels and how that all is tied to PCOS. So I got a master's and a PhD. I studied under an REI, or reproductive endocrinologist, and that started the 13 years of research that I've been doing on this approach. And then after the third study, the So I did an NIH postdoc where I got to do more research on this.
Mhm.
And after the last study, well, I realized, okay, really, this is something big. So I got a grant from the National Science Foundation to launch Lilly Health, publish Low Insulin Lifestyle. And Lilly is an acronym for Low Insulin Lifestyle. And that has really been launching this to really teach patients what is insulin resistance? It's the absolute most important thing to address if you want to manage PCOS, and how to do that with nutrition. So that's been my journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And as you were speaking, some of what you were saying kind of resonated with my journey as far as always trying to be healthy, of course, as physician and folks that are in the healthcare industry, we want to be examples of that health. And I hear you when you say, I'm doing everything right. And somehow that stupid scale is just being so stubborn and it's not budging, and how frustrating that can be. And you're going to your doctor and you're being told, well, you just need to lose weight, and this is the formula for losing weight, eat less, exercise more. And you're doing what you're being advised to do, but not seeing the result. And certainly I hear you when you say that, and I feel you. And I'm glad that you took that to go further rather than kind of, this is just not for me kind of thing, which some folks do have that reaction. So I'm glad to hear that you went further in finding out, well, there has to be something more, and kudos to you for that. So tell us a little bit about how first what is, I know folks hear the word insulin and we often relate it to diabetics, right? Diabetics takes the medication insulin, and it's taken for the purpose of lowering their glucose levels. So let us know a little bit about insulin resistance.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, the most recent estimate suggests that 90%, 90% of US adults have insulin resistance, and possibly 30% of kids. So it is extremely common. I talk about insulin resistance as being on a scale. Think of you as a 10 means you have diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And a 1 is perfectly healthy, no insulin resistance. And everything between 2 and 9 is somewhere, some range of severity of insulin resistance. So everybody's on this range somewhere. You just don't know where you are until you actually test for insulin resistance. But, I think what's most important is to talk about what is insulin resistance separate from diabetes, right? So insulin is a hormone. It is extremely important. If you don't have it, you'll die unless you take insulin, right? And it helps you take glucose and other nutrients from the food that you eat and put it into your cells, where it can either use that for energy or it can store it as fat. But insulin in general is really your fat storage hormone, because you cannot store fat without insulin. You have to have it. So I love to use a visual here. So I talk about what does this mean for insulin resistance? So, when you secrete insulin, your glucose gets taken out of the bloodstream and into the cells. And that's how it lowers your blood glucose, because it's taking it out of the blood. But occasionally, over time, if you eat certain types of food that cause your pancreas to secrete too much insulin, it leads to insulin resistance. And here's how. So here I have a lime. Okay. And in this lime, I have some, can you see this?
I can.
I have some push pins. Okay. So imagine your lime is a cell, and these push pins are your insulin receptors. Okay. Now, typical muscle cells have 200,000 insulin receptors, but I didn't have quite that many push pins today. So I just figured I'd stick with this. So imagine you're eating food and your pancreas secretes insulin, and it has to bind to these little receptors here. And once it binds, it lets glucose into the cell. But when all of these are bound by insulin, the cell kind of freaks out and says, whoa, 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 whoa. There's too much insulin. There's too much glucose. I don't need any more glucose. I'm actually going to start taking these off the cell. Okay.
Mhm.
It's like having a party and you invite all your friends, but then they invite all their friends and they invite all
Mhm.
their friends. And you're like, there's too many people here. I'm going to start locking the door. Okay. And that's what happens. The cell starts taking these receptors off. But what
Mhm.
happens with that is that then there's less glucose that can get into the cell,
Right.
which means blood glucose levels rise. Well, the
Mhm.
pancreas says, hey, there's too much glucose in the blood. It can't stay in the blood. So it secretes more and more and more insulin to say, hey, well, I guess I just need to make more insulin to drive more glucose. But what does that do is it continues to overwhelm the cells and they keep down regulating their insulin receptors. Now,
Mhm.
when these receptors become so resistant and blood glucose rises too much, that's when you're diagnosed with diabetes. But
Mhm.
this process can happen for decades before you actually ever get diagnosed with diabetes. And so you have continuing elevations in insulin and glucose that just continue to rise. But the important thing about that is that your pancreas can still compensate, right? If it
Mhm.
just keeps secreting more insulin, it'll eventually get all that glucose out of the blood. So you may have a normal glucose for years and a normal A1C, but if you don't measure your insulin,
Mhm.
you don't know how hard that poor little pancreas is having to
Mhm.
work in order to keep that blood glucose normal.
Mhm.
And that number is what's so important because by the
Gotcha.
time A1C is high, sometimes the horse has left the barn at that point. You're right.
Mhm.
It's really
Mhm.
hard to reverse. And so that's when you really, I hope that explains and gives a little bit of a
And
visual.
that is very helpful, and thank you for doing that, because of course we in medicine we definitely, that's part of screening for diabetes. We check their A1C levels, or we check your glucose levels, your random glucose levels, or your fasting glucose levels. But you're right, there's a process that leads up to that, that really there's a precursor process. And that precursor process is the process that you really want to take a hold of, because that's your opportunity for change and to redirect the course of your illness. And
Right.
so thank you for sharing that. So how does one develop that insulin resist? What has your research shown as far as why are they now becoming why has the cell become resistant to and no longer why is the insulin no longer signaling that uptake of glucose that it should be? Do we
Well,
know?
because insulin's a hormone. And just like every other hormone, when the receptors become saturated, the receptors start to downregulate. And that
Mm-hmm.
is seen in almost every cell in the body,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you don't want to have too much glucose in the cells sometimes, right? Because it can
Mm-hmm.
overwhelm the cell. And so anytime, so many different processes in the body is that when you have too many receptors bound, it starts to down regulate those receptors.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if you're eating foods that are causing over secretion of insulin, and we'll talk about what those are, then that's more likely to happen and it's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen faster. And
Gotcha.
what's so important about that is because when I said earlier that insulin is your fat storage hormone, if you have more insulin in circulation, it doesn't matter if your A1C is normal. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter if your fasting glucose is normal. Because if your insulin is high, you're
Mm-hmm.
more likely to store the calories you eat as fat
Mm-hmm.
versus burn them for energy.
Mm-hmm.
There's also something also extremely important to understand about insulin resistance is that it has an impact on your appetite and it also has an impact on your energy levels.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this analogy. I like to give analogies because it helps put things into perspective.
Of
So
course.
imagine you're driving down the road and
Mm-hmm.
you just filled up your tank. You're in a car, you're in your car, you just filled up a tank. You know you have a full tank of gas,
Mm-hmm.
but well, a full tank of stored body fat. And all of a sudden the gas light comes on. And you're like, I know I just filled up the tank. There's no way I need more gas, but I guess I don't want to run out of gas. So I'm gonna start looking for the next gas station. And I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
slow down my car because I know if I go slower, then I'll conserve more energy. So
Mm-hmm.
this is exactly what insulin resistance is in a nutshell. Because
Mm-hmm.
when your insulin is high, you actually can't burn body fat. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
Insulin levels are high, you cannot burn body fat because you
Okay.
have to, your metabolism exists on a seesaw. And so
Mm-hmm.
when insulin is high, it signals to the body and the brain, hey, food is coming in. We need to use that or store it. Well, if food is coming in, you're not burning body fat, right? But so it's always looking for, number one, it's looking for your next meal because it doesn't know when that meal is going to come. And when your insulin's too high, it's difficult to get glucose into the cells. So you're struggling to find energy there. You can't burn body fat when your insulin is high. So the only other place you can get energy is your muscle mass. And your body doesn't want to burn muscle mass. So it makes you sleepy. So you'll take a nap. And it makes you hungry. So you'll look for your next meal.
That's
So
just
this
a
is
horrible
why
cycle.
this is why everyone's always hungry and they're always craving carbs, is because their insulin's high. And this is why they're always tired, because their insulin is high. And so that's why they struggle with weight loss. That's why they struggle with fatigue, and why they struggle with their appetite. So I hope that says to a lot of people, I feel like that's me. Like, I can't lose weight. I'm always tired. I'm always hungry.
And they're not crazy.
And they're not crazy.
You're not imagining this.
No, you are not imagining it. It is so common. And, the other thing with insulin is that it is your master hormone. So it affects so many other hormones. So like PCOS, right?
Right.
Insulin tells these cells in the ovaries called theca cells to overproduce androgens, right? If you don't have PCOS, that system isn't broken, right? That system doesn't release androgens. Like it has a slow release of androgens the way it should be. But when you have PCOS, those little theca cells are overactive. So when insulin goes up, those cells start cranking out testosterone. And that is why you have all these symptoms, right? The hair growth, the hair loss, the acne, the irregular cycles, the infertility, the weight, all of it comes back down to insulin resistance.
And that's where we're going to pause. For now, that is. I'm sure you're eager to hear the rest. So don't forget to subscribe so you get notified as soon as part 2 is out. We're going to dive even deeper. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you then.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Straight Talk with My OBMD podcast. To learn more about this topic, visit our website at myobmd.org. Subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I can't wait to spend more time with you on our next episode of Straight Talk with My OBMD.